The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $40, and the loudest man on the lot laughed at him in front of the whole crowd. Elias Corr did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked up at what he had bought, a great dead slab of iron standing off by itself against the fence at the edge of the salvage lot. A 3-ton bank vault door of rusted cast and steel. Near 7 feet tall and round-cornered and blind, its huge boltwork wheel seized fast and its hinge frozen in the dust, the whole face gone the color of dried blood with rust, leaning rusted shut where a wrecking crew had dragged it out of a torn-down building and left it. The demolition men had pulled it from the guts of an old bank and shoved it to the far fence. And 100 pickers had walked past it as too heavy to move and too rusted to bother with, so plainly dead the crowd read it as nothing but scrap steel. Elias had just paid $40 to own it, seized wheel and frozen hinge and 3 dead tons in all. It was a bright, clear Saturday morning, the kind of hard light that comes off a gravel yard at the end of summer. At a demolition and salvage sale in the fenced lot of a wrecking company on the edge of a small county town. Elias was 74 years old, lean and a little stooped now, but sure in the hands, with a deeply lined face gone soft and weathered, close-cropped white hair under a flat cap, wire spectacles pushed up his nose, and pale, patient eyes that took their time. His hands were broad and scarred, the knuckles marked with a lifetime of steel and cold iron. He had worked that trade his whole life, a locksmith and a restorer of old, strong hardware, the one the banks and the estate men sent for when a safe had a dead combination or a vault a frozen bolt nobody living knew how to work, until the trade went to keypads and sealed electronic drives, and the old men who could read a lock by its feel were quietly closed out. The man who laughed was Dorset Vale, who ran the biggest salvage and scrap yard in 3 counties. A heavy-set man of about 55 in a loud plum-colored windbreaker he wore to be seen in, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a thick gold ring on one hand and a stub of a cigar in the other. $40, Dorset said, loud, so the whole lot could hear it. $40 for a rusted shut vault door that don't even open? Lockman. The wheel's seized, the bolts are welded up with rust, the hinge is froze solid, and the whole slab's dead weight 3 ton if it's an ounce. Nobody's swung one of these monsters in 100 years. You can't open it, you can't sell it, and you can't hardly move it without a crane. You didn't buy a vault door, old-timer, you bought a 3-ton hunk of scrap steel, and you paid $40 to haul it home when I'd have cut it up for the metal and paid you for the weight. He coined the name right there, loud enough to carry, the old man's tombstone, and it stuck for the rest of that month. Because a tall, rusted slab of iron leaning against a fence did look like nothing so much as a grave marker. The crowd laughed because Dorset laughed, the way a crowd does. Elias stood through it without a change in his face, his hands folded quiet in front of him, and let the laughter pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it needed something and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe, because the people who stay for stories like Elias's are who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Elias said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise. What Dorset Vale could not have known, grinning behind his cigar, was that Elias had stood in front of that dead slab with 50 years of the trade awake in him. The crowd saw a rusted hunk against a fence. Elias saw the door, under the scale, the round, cornered casting done heavy and true. The boltwork laid out by a real maker's hand, and not stamped out cheap, the great wheel geared finer than any ordinary vault ever needed, and a thickness behind the boltwork that did not match a plain slab of plate. The proportions were wrong for what they were all saying. This was a maker's, not a cheap strong-room door bolted up by the dozen. Above all, he knew that a proud old vault builder who cast a door like this almost always hid its truth, where the world would never think to look, behind a false back plate set to look solid, sprung by a catch no stranger would ever find. Elias knew the difference between a scrap door and a great vault door somebody had let die, and what he found that night would cut a forgotten name, and the record of the bank that door had guarded back into a history that had struck them both out. Elias had come up hard. He went to the locksmith's bench young, apprenticed to an old, safe man, learning the wards and the wheels and the long, patient feel of a mechanism until a deadlock ran sweet and a stuck bolt gave under the hand. His wife Mirren had died after a long illness, and they had buried no family of their own, and after she was gone, he lived alone in a small house behind his old shop with his rows of picks and his quiet. The town had a use for his hands and no use at all for his memory. He knew that. A man who had freed the frozen hardware of 1,000 old vaults could no more walk past a great vault door going for scrap than walk past his own past. So he bid, because he had seen that somebody built it to hide the thing that mattered most. If you've made it this far into Elias Corr's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the rest of the salvage first, the torn-out radiators and copper pipe and boxed builder's hardware knocked down to the pickers, while Elias waited by the fence beside the towering dead door. When the auctioneer finally came to it and called for a bid, Dorset glanced up, called out his joke, and not one other hand went up. Elias raised one finger, and the gavel came down at 40. He paid cash, signed the slip, and arranged to bring a crane truck and a low trailer around at the end of the day, because a 3-ton vault door was a killing thing to move whole. The story got around the town before Elias's trailer was off the county road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the feed store to ask, grinning, whether he was going to prop his tombstone up in the yard and carve his own name on it to get his $40 back. Ned Marsh, who ran the hardware counter, said it plainer, that there was nothing to a rusted-shut vault door but dead weight and no lock left alive in it to pick. Elias was buying a can of penetrating oil, a set of fine picks, and a box of clean rag, and did not look up. "We'll see," he said, and that was the whole of his answer. He had spent 50 years learning that a door is either a maker's or it isn't, and the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which. But Elias did not open the door up in the daylight, with the picker's truck still on the lot and Dorset holding court by the auction table. He waited until the place had emptied out and he had the great slab home, craned down off the trailer and stood square against his shop wall under a single work lamp, and went at it alone that night, after the town had gone quiet and the windows up the street had gone dark. He did not tear into it. He knew that a door like this keeps its truth deep behind the iron, and that you reach those places slowly, the way you reach into anything a careful hand once closed up. He worked oil into the seized boltwork and the frozen wheel, and eased them a turn at a time until the great bolts drew, and the wheel came round in his hands, and the massive door gave off the frame it had been leaning against, swinging its dead weight slow on the freed hinge and laying its whole back open to him under the lamp. And when he ran his hand across the inner face behind the boltwork, he stopped, because the door did not run as deep in solid metal as its thickness said it should, and the plate that closed the boltwork chamber was not the raw cast panel a maker leaves where no eye falls, but a fitted, finished back plate set in with a care that made no sense, unless it was hiding what lay behind it. Down at the diner they were still asking if he had sold his tombstone for scrap yet. Elias set his fingertips along the seam of that false plate and began to feel for the catch that a proud maker sets where the world would never look. The door had its own long, hard history, and the town had let it go for scrap without once asking after it. It ran back to the man who built it, a self-taught 19th century American vault builder of no fame in his own time, who had learned the safe and vault trade alone in a Rivertown foundry in an age when the great Easton safe houses already had the big city banks sewn up. And it ran back to the one bank that door was cast to guard, the Cedar Ford Merchants Bank, a small independent bank in a hard-luck town that had commissioned this great door for the strong room it meant to stand behind for a century. The maker cast and fitted it far beyond any ordinary commission, because he meant once to build the best thing he was capable of. But the Cedar Ford Merchants Bank failed in the panic of the 1890s, closed its doors inside a single hard week, and was wound up so completely that its very name was struck from the county's official rolls when the receivers were done, and the door drifted from lot to lot as an oversized slab nobody could place, until it was dragged out of a torn-down building and shoved against a salvage fence 2 generations from where it was cast, its wheel seized and its secret unopened. No one alive remembering that a great maker had built it, or that a bank had ever kept its faith behind it. And sealed in the false back of that door, trusted there the last hard week the bank stood, lay the bank's own deposit ledger and a bundle of letters written by the one teller who stayed to the end, a woman named Cora Vance, the bank's only black woman teller, who had balanced its books to the last dollar the week it collapsed, and whose name the receivers had struck clean out of the town's record along with the bank's, so that the one honest hand at the end was the one most thoroughly erased. The maker himself died poor and unknown, his finest work sealed up around a failed bank's last honest reckoning and a struck-out woman's own words. What none of them ever asked was what becomes of the record a dying bank trusts to a door, and the name of the one who kept it when both the bank and the maker are forgotten. The answer had been leaning against the salvage fence the whole time, sealed behind a false plate in a $40 door nobody wanted. Elias found the catch a little after midnight. A slip of steel no wider than a matchstick, set flush in the casting along the base of the boltwork chamber, that a stranger would have brushed 1,000 times and never felt. He pressed it, and something behind the false plate gave with a soft, dry knock 100 years in the waiting, and the fitted back plate dropped a half-inch on a hidden pin and swung free. Behind it was a shallow, dust-dry cavity built into the depth of the door, a slim concealed document drawer, and in it, stacked and waiting, lay a heavy bound ledger gone amber-edged with age, and on top of it a thick bundle of letters bound in faded ribbon. Elias lifted them out under the lamp, and when he had the ledger open and read the fine, sure hand that had ruled and balanced every column of it, he set it down and stood very still, This was the whole last reckoning of a bank, the Cedar Ford Merchants Bank, its every depositor and dollar accounted for and balanced to the last hard Friday it stood, and the letters, in the same steady hand, were signed at the foot of each one by the teller who had ruled those columns, Cora Vance. Writing the week the doors closed to the depositors she could not pay, telling each the plain truth of what the bank owed them and swearing the books were square, a woman doing the one honest thing left to do in a place that was about to forget she had ever done it. But the ledger and the letters were only half of it. Elias went deeper now, drawing the small lamp in close along the inner face of the door, and there, cast into the iron itself under the rust where only a maker's eye would ever catch it, was a maker's cast plate. The vault builder's own name and his river town raised proud in the metal, and beneath it the pattern the trade had only ever half believed was real, an early round cornered screw and lever vault door. One of the few the man ever cast. And low inside the boltwork frame, struck into the steel by the maker's own die a lifetime ago, and never meant for any eye but another lockman's, was the same name again, a date, the works number, and cut beside it the name of the bank it was built for, the Cedar Ford Merchants Bank. Elias sat down on his shop stool and understood that the tombstone the town had laughed at for a month was a rare early maker marked vault door by a great forgotten builder, museum grade to anyone who knew that name, worth a small fortune restored, and worth far more than money as the keeper of a failed bank's last honest reckoning, and the words of a woman the record had struck out. The next morning Elias did not call a scrapyard, and did not cut the door up for its metal, and did not gut the casting into one of those rustic salvage iron coffee tables or a novelty wall piece for his own shop, and a few in town thought him a fool a second time. He let them. He had spent one whole month being the man who paid $40 for a tombstone, and he did not mind being thought a fool by people who had never once been right about the thing in front of them. He carried the maker's mark and the ledger and the letters to a museum of American banking and ironwork, and to a county archivist who knew what 100-year-old bank ledger and a struck name meant, and set himself to the harder thing, to cut a forgotten maker's name, and a struck-out woman's name back into the record that had dropped them both, and to find what family Cora Vance had left. The curator went very still over the cast plate, and said quietly that a documented early vault door by that maker, built to a named commission with the maker's own die-struck works number in the frame, was the kind of thing a museum waits a lifetime for, and had all but given up as gone, and that the man who cast it had been no failed country founder at all, but exactly the kind of overlooked master the record is supposed to keep, and had simply lost. And Cora Vance had descendants in the country still, a great-granddaughter 2 counties over among them. A gray woman who had grown up on a scrap of family talk that some old great-grandmother had worked at a bank that went bust and was let go and never spoke of it, a story the family told as an old shame and mostly let go. Elias went to her that fall with the letters, and the ledger open to the columns in that steady hand, and watched a gray woman read her own great-grandmother's hand across 100 years, the plain, honest reckoning she had made, and signed the week her bank died. She put a hand flat on the table and went quiet. They had grown up thinking their old woman had been let go under some cloud the family did not name. The ledger and the letters told them instead that she had balanced the books to the last dollar, told every depositor the square truth, and been failed only by a bank that could not pay, and a town that struck her name out with the banks. The woman asked why he had troubled to come so far to give a struck-out stranger's family back their grandmother's name. Elias said only that a maker casts his own name into the iron where nobody will ever look, because he needs to believe somebody will someday come who can find it, so that being forgotten can never be the same as never having balanced the books at all, and that he had nobody of his own to leave a thing to, so he had brought the old bank's record and a struck-out woman's own words home to the people they were always meant for. There was one thing more Elias did before the door left his shop, and he did it for the maker and for the teller and for no one else. He restored it the slow, careful way over a season of nights, freed the seized boltwork, brought the frozen wheel round sweet on its gearing, cut the rust back off the casting until the iron came up dark and true, rehung the great door until it swung, and closed with the soft, sure thud of a vault the way it had the day the maker set it, not to make a show of it, but because a door a great maker had poured his life into deserved to do the one quiet thing it was made to do. He did not cut it up for its metal, and did not gut the casting into a coffee table or a novelty piece, because using a rare maker's vault door for scrap or a curiosity was the very thing that had nearly killed it, and there was no truth in it. So on the last night, with the museum's people coming in the morning, Elias pressed the little slip catch and let the false back plate swing free one last time on its hidden pin, sound and dry and ready, the way the maker had built it to keep a thing safe against the years, and then drew the great door shut until the boltwork drew home, and the whole slab stood square and closed, breathing faint oil and old iron to the rafters. That part was never the point. He had made it whole again, so that the man who cast it and the woman whose reckoning it had kept would be seen one time by somebody who finally understood what they were. That fall the door went where it belonged, into a museum of American banking and ironwork, with the maker's name read clear at last, and his rare commission named beside it, and the bank's name was written back into the county rolls it had been struck from, and Cora Vance's name written in beside it as the teller who balanced its books to the end, generations late. So the family that had thought their old woman let go under a cloud knew at last that she had kept faith to the last dollar. Word of it went around the town the same as the laughter had, only quieter. And the people who had called Elias a fool let the name the old man's tombstone drop and did not pick it up again. Dorset Vale was not run out of business and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he never bothered to look inside, and the next time he held court by the auction table the others did not lean in so far. Being right was the whole of what Elias had wanted, and it had brought a great forgotten maker's name and a struck-out woman's name back out of the dust. The museum kept the door where the town could see it. They stood the great round cornered vault door in the middle of the front hall under a soft light, the iron waxed dark and the boltwork glinting true, the wheel turning free and the false back left open behind glass so a card could show how it had kept its cash, the rare early vault door of a great forgotten maker, cast for a bank that failed in a hard luck week and restored to the maker's name. At last, and behind its false plate, the honest last reckoning of that bank and the name of the teller, Cora Vance, whom the record had struck out and this door had kept. And on a still evening that next spring, the light going gold through the tall front windows, Elias Corr drove over to look in on it, and there in the last of the sun stood the door, whole and freed and seen at last. The iron glowing dark where a stranger's hands had finally reached it. Elias was 74 years old. a man the auction had laughed at one whole month, and he stood quiet a long moment and laid one broad scarred hand flat on the cool iron beside the maker's cast name and nodded once. The way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had said it for him, the way work always did. A maker hides a bank's last honest reckoning behind a false plate and casts his own name into the iron where nobody will ever look, trusting that somebody will come who can find what his hands made and kept, so that being forgotten for a lifetime can never be the same as never having built the thing at all, and a town rarely knows what greatness, or whose good name, was left to rust at its own fence line until somebody troubles to open the thing they laughed at. So I'll leave it to you. Was Elias Corr right to give the door to a museum under the maker's name and carry a struck-out woman's reckoning home to strangers without keeping any of it for himself? Or was that one decency too far in a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments, and I'll read them.